This one last question up from the audience, and this will appeal to both of you. One is an image maker, SIG like you've been, and Senator Bryan is a member of the Senate. And let's have SIG, if you'll answer this first, please. Will President Obama manage to forge a true bipartisan spirit in Congress? What will it take to do so?
Well, I'd like to think he's going to try to do that. He's not off to a good start. This is a tough, rough 30 days in office. He's had 4 or 5 of his cabinet people rejected. There's a couple more that have problems, I understand. There's no slam dunk for his labor secretary and his commitments to the labor bills that are pending. And I thought he made a fundamental mistake, as I told you earlier, in not reaching out to Republicans on the House side. And as I read in the paper somewhere, what he did to Republicans, he put them back in the game. All of a sudden, they became part of the game. He gave them something to aspire to become part of what's going on here. If you look back at the more significant economic booms after bad cycles, they all had one common denominator, and that was some form of cutting of taxes, some form of taxation change. The best that comes to mind is John F. Kennedy. John, you and I talked about that before, and Ronald Reagan. And the interesting thing is, in the John F. Kennedy cycle in 1960, it was Democrats who pushed for the change. It was not the Republicans. They understood that you have to get people with some semblance of having some money back in their pocket to get the economy cooking again. The argument is, well, if you cut taxes, it's only going to help businesses. Well, businesses take that money and they put it in banks, and banks disperse it. And they take that money and they buy stocks, and the stocks then go on to build new factories. In other words, they're job-created vehicles. But if you put this money in this huge bailout into social policies, per se, and you grow your government that you wanted to have in place for the last 50 years, you know, there's a lot of dead Democrats who are very happy with spending it that way, and a lot that have been through this and couldn't get it on. If you do that, and the job creation is not evident, I maintain and believe that as quickly as you rose up, you can fall down twice as quick. The cycles are so tight. There is no room for breathers here. I mean, keep in mind, George Bush was elected, and right after he was elected, he had a 92% approval rating because of that catastrophe in New York. But they never let him catch a deep breath. I read another story that said that the hatred for Bush was pushed so much as the adoration for Obama that they weren't sure who was writing the story. But it turned out to be the same people. So I think that he can forge a coalition. We've always been a nation that's been divided, by the way. Don't let people kid you about that. 1950, Harry Truman won by less than 1/2 of 1% of the vote. In 1960, John F. Kennedy won by 1/2 of 1% of the vote. In 1968, Richard Nixon won by roughly 1% of the vote. In 2000, you saw what the Bush-Gore race was like, and in 2004, with Kerry. In other words, these tight election cycles are not unusual in America. It's healthy. There's nothing wrong with discourse. And there's nothing wrong with good, honest debate. And so don't let anybody tell you that we should all get together here and hold hands and kumbaya and come together and make this thing all work out well. It ain't going to happen that way. But you've got to let the opposition party be a player. If you don't, they have the ability to unify themselves more than they ever thought they did. And I think he gave them a window. I think he gave Republicans a window to get back in the game, as I read. And I believe that. So I think we made a mistake in that regard.
Not surprisingly, perhaps I have a little different take than my friend Sid on this. I know of no American president in my lifetime who goes up on the Hill and meets in their political lair, the Capitol, to meet with the Republican minority in the House. He extended the olive branch, he tried to do everything he could possibly do, and he got not a single Republican vote. Much as in the art of the tango, it takes two to dance, and the Republicans have to be willing to do that. They make their own political calculus in the House. It's not in their best interest to do so. Now let's talk about the Senate. The Senate, by its very nature, has to be a more bipartisan institution because the thing that distinguishes the Senate from the House, and it's the core of the political differences between the two. The House is a majoritarian institution. With a margin of 1 vote, you can limit the time for debate, whether debate will occur at all, whether one amendment will be allowed at one time. In the Senate, which is a minoritarian institution, you have, as we all know, the right of the filibuster, which requires a supermajority of 60 to invoke cloture, or no vote can be possible, and you have the right of the unlimited amendment. Senator Reid gave the Republicans an opportunity to offer all kinds of amendments. That is part of a bipartisan process. I must say, with all due respect to my friend of so many years' sake, that, we tried for 8 years the policy of the tax reductions which this administration has sponsored. We have now, in 8 years, doubled the national debt. We had a campaign in 2008 with all of the imperfections that Sig and I have talked about, which I freely acknowledge. And the American people overwhelmingly said, look, we want a different approach taken. So here is a dilemma that confronts the Democrats and confronts the president. As has been pointed out, only 3 Republican votes for the recovery package that passed the Senate earlier today. There is a great debate within the Democratic Party of how we proceed. Obama has tried to fulfill the promise of a new political dialogue, a bipartisan approach. I've cited a couple of examples of that. What a lot of Democrats are saying, well, what has it gotten? No votes in the House, 3 in the Senate. We won the election. We have a different approach to what we think will be right. Sig is quite correct. There are inherent risks in that. If that doesn't work, then essentially that will be a legitimate political issue in 2010 or the 2012 cycle. So I think right now what you're going to see, which is a very interesting thing, the House is much aggrieved by the changes that the Senate Democrats made, the concessions that they made to get the 3 votes from the Republicans. And so that's going to be quite a debate between the House and the Senate. And the Senate will say, look, we need to get 60 votes. We've got to make some concessions. And the Democrats in the House, particularly the more liberal Democrats, are going to say, look, we don't want to concede these points. We've raised these issues in the campaign. We've raised the campaign on these issues. We are not going to abandon those simply because the president wants to sound a more bipartisan too. I think what the president is thinking, though, not just this vote. Because clearly getting this is a big win today for the president. I think he will be successful in getting legislation enacted, hopefully before the end of the week, before the presidential recess. But I think Obama's looking at a tone prospectively. If this issue is tough, how about health care? What about reform of the entitlement programs, which are a disaster, that are about to envelop the national budget in the out years? That's going to require some bipartisanship, and I think the president is trying to send a message that he wants to reach out. But people have to be willing to compromise, and at this point I've seen very little willingness on the part of the Republicans to compromise, and they have a strategy of their own, and